Okay, I want to talk about three things today in relation to the book industry and readers, and that is the mainstream-ification of reading / the cool-ification of reading, a decrease in critical thinking and a trend towards anti-intellectualism, and then a general trend of people wanting to turn their brains off because of the state of the world being so bad. And all of these things relate back to how our society as a whole is descending deeper into fascism. Hello everyone, my name is JEN-nuh-nee, and this is my channel, This Story Ain't Over. And if you're new here, I'm a longtime booktuber, and I tend to try to give you recommendations of books that you typically would not see, that are from BIPOC authors, and that truly more people need to be giving more love. Now, if you clicked on this video, you're probably interested in more discussion-y type videos and sort of video essays on the book industry. So lock in, because I have a bunch more of these videos that you can check out down below. So I have been putting off making this video for ages because I feel like there's just so much to talk about in regards to these topics. As someone who came from OG booktube and just this general love of reading, and then now being in this day and age where we have Bookstagram, we have Book Talk, and just this general sort of mainstreamification or cool-ification of reading, it's a very weird Twilight Zone type of, place to be in. Recently, I was talking to an OG booktuber friend of mine, and we were talking about sort of book talk and the way that reading as a hobby has become mainstream. It's become cool, which when we started our channels, it was not cool. It was not the thing that everyone was doing. It was not the fun, cool girl hobby to have. And I think part of this was brought on by the rise of TikTok, but also just generally the pandemic forcing people into hobbies that were at home. And then many people who typically would have done other things getting into reading and then sticking with it afterwards. Publishing as an industry saw a boom during the pandemic as well, and they have managed to hold on to some of that success since the pandemic. And I 100% agree that it is partly because of Book Talk. Now, I'm a booktuber and I love books and I love that more people are reading. I have no problem with that. However, and like I've talked about in many other, videos and stuff, the fact that more people are reading does not mean that they are all reading good books. And that is a fact of media, of literature, of just generally anything, that when more people latch onto it, there's going to be a commercialization of those things. And so although a lot of us would view books and literature as art, as literature with a capital L, as something that is intellectual, for a lot of these people who are getting into reading now and who are what some people might call a freshly cooked reader, and who have typically, maybe hated reading as a kid or in high school or haven't read since then, and then are finding reading again as adults and latching on to these very popular books. And what they're realizing with these very popular books, these commercial books, is that they're very easy to read. And that's kind of the way it goes with commercial stuff. Like commercial movies, like an Avengers movie, doesn't have much subtlety to it. It's very straightforward, and it kind of like punches you in the face with its messages. But typically when you're looking for art, you are looking for something with more substance, with more layers, with more nuance. But I think where the problem lies is that these people, all power to them, they want to read, fun, easy things. That's fine. But when a vast majority of people are picking up these very commercial books that are very simple, that are hitting you on the head with their messages, or are just generally of a very low reading level, you end up in this situation where publishing as an industry, which is, a business at the end of the day, is seeing that these commercial, basic SJM Colleen Hoover books are very popular and are making a lot of money. And what does publishing want to do? Make more money. So what will they do? Double down. I've had so many of these conversations with people recently, especially on like short form content on Instagram and TikTok. If you don't follow me on those platforms, go ahead and follow me, because I post a lot of like discussion videos there as well, and much shorter ones. But one thing that has come up a lot is that, we shouldn't be putting the onus on readers. We shouldn't be blaming readers. We should be blaming publishers. And I do agree with that to a certain extent, but I also do disagree with it a bit, and we'll get to that in a little bit. Let's start with publishers, because they are the problem. They're the number one problem. Once publishing realized that there was this very large audience of people who were picking up books and reading again and, making books bestsellers, but they were all fairly unwell read, and we're typically looking for books that were just like brain rot, as you might say, that don't have much, value beyond like the entertainment aspect, then publishers realize that that's what's going to sell, and they start deprioritizing things like editing, things like subtlety and nuance in the books that they acquire, and they also start shoehorning existing books into this sort of trend that people are looking for, marketing them in a certain way. And so that's why we get a lot of like fantasy books getting shoehorned into romantasy, even though they really aren't. They just have like a romance and a fantasy, or they're just a fantasy with a romance, but they're not really a romantasy. But publishing knows, marketing people know that, people are looking for romantasies, so they're just going to shoehorn those books into there. This is also where we get the trend towards, only describing books through their tropes and not really giving any other information, and then people picking up those books expecting a trope, and sometimes actually being misled because the publisher, the marketing person, just wanted to shoehorn that book into a trope so that you'll pick it up. So we have, this large audience of commercial readers readers, and then we have publishers pandering to that audience. And that's where we get down to the author level. If authors are realizing that, whatever books that they are trying to sell, that they're putting on submission, that, they've even sold before, are not selling as well as the, say, commercial thing that they put out, or aren't getting bought by publishers because they're not a specific commercial genre, say romantasy, then they're forced to choose between their career and money, or sticking to their guns and writing the book that they actually, want to read and want people to read, and that might not appeal to a larger, broader audience, but that they believe needs to be out there in the world. We live in late stage capitalism. A lot of people are going to go for money. So we have these authors that, shoehorn themselves into these situations, or they do semi-stick to their guns in the sense that they still want to put out a book that, has a little bit more artistic meaning or a different message, or, has a really strong message. And this might be some sort of like moral argument, whatever it is. Even the authors who do that get into a situation where they are putting out these books, or they are seeing other people put out books with, these big grand messages that are political in some way, and seeing this big mass of commercial, less well-read readers read these books and completely misunderstand the point. And this is where we get our trend towards anti-intellectualism. Because if you're an author who doesn't want to write in these commercial genres, and you still want to stick towards some sort of political, intellectual message, you're finding yourself in this sticky situation where you have to basically be like super overt with all of your messages so that people won't misunderstand you. And I've seen the argument that like in this day and age, authors can't trust their readers to actually get the point. And this is because of a just general decrease in critical thinking. But why do we have this decrease in critical thinking? Did the decrease in critical thinking come first, or did the pandering to a lack of critical thinking and lower level of intellectualism come first? In this day and age where people have phones and social media and are constantly scrolling and need things in like instant gratification and do not have the patience to wait and stop and think and critically engage with the stuff that they're reading, then authors are put in a position where it's hard to compete with that type of thinking. But this is where I sort of stop sympathizing with authors and readers, because if we see that readers aren't understanding us, and then we go and dumb down our books and make everything straightforward, then these readers will never have to learn the lesson of trying to critically engage with what they read. They might start engaging with books outside of their regular commercial genres, but once they do latch on to these other books, they're going to read those and be spoon-fed all of this information and never have to actually really critically engage and interpret the books themselves, which leads them to just stay in this state of not bothering to critically engage with what they read. And I think this is the problem, because we've created this situation where, yes, our world is descending into instant gratification and people just being hypnotized by social media. But just because we're seeing like a lack of attention and a lack of critical thinking, if we continuously dumb down things, then we're just going to continue feeding this cycle until we are all in this same sphere. And this is a situation that also frustrates readers who are willing to critically engage and try to interpret things themselves. Because a lot of times I've seen arguments where like readers and reviewers who review books that everyone loves, and then when that person gives that, popular book a bad review, people are angry. They're like, why do you have to be so negative? Why can't you be positive? And it's this level of toxic positivity because everyone just wants to view reading as like a fun hobby, a place to turn off your brain, which is so strange to me because it's literally an intellectual hobby. It's not quite the same as a film or a video game. Reading quite literally engages a different part of your brain because you are using your imagination. And I think there's this perception that just because you critically engage with something and you criticize it, it means that you can't love that thing. But I would argue that in a lot of cases, if you really do love something, you would want to critically engage with it and understand it and discuss it more. Recently with like the Hunger Games prequels and stuff and Sunrise on the Reaping, I felt kind of like pressured to rate it very high because, everyone is just obsessed with the popularity of it because they love the Hunger Games. But Sunrise on the Reaping was very much that book that was like hitting you on the head with its messages versus doing it through subtlety and through letting you interpret things yourself. Even though the main trilogy isn't so subtle, it still lets you understand things yourself. It shows you the themes versus just telling you them straight up, which I definitely think that Sunrise on the Reaping does do. It does more telling than showing. And this is a classic element of craft for writers, the idea that you should be showing a idea versus telling it to your reader, rather than just stating that someone is angry, showing us how their body language, what they're saying, how they're saying it, how all of that amounts to them being angry, that is showing. And I think a lot of books these days are trending towards, wanting to have a strong message, a political message, but then not actually presenting us with a fictional narrative that shows the characters understanding these concepts concepts or coming to face these concepts in the narrative and immersing us in those ideas. They are instead just point blank telling you. We've overall devolved into this situation where we no longer trust readers to understand the message because of the society we live in. But that again reinforces a situation where readers are just spoon-fed the message, and so they don't have to try harder to understand things, and they never strive towards that level of intellectualism. Again, I've talked about this on like Instagram and TikTok and stuff, and I had a few people like comment about how, oh, I'm being elitist and snobby, and that these takes are snobby and elitist. And you know what? I'm totally fine with people thinking that, because I think although snobbery and elitism is not great, it does serve a bit of a purpose in society in some ways. I talked about how a lot of these like freshly cooked readers who are, you know, reading very commercial things, have gotten into reading because of book talk, because of the pandemic. They are just reading what is comfortable to them and what is easy and what they think they will enjoy. But I could guarantee you that all of these readers would very likely enjoy books that actually have more depth to them and more nuance to them if they actually tried them. And I think a lot of people don't even want to try, don't want to bother. They just want to turn their brain off because that has become like an accepted thing to do. And I think that's where like the shame thing needs to come in. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with you reading very commercial books and, you know, romanticises and romances, but, you know, I still raise my eyebrows at you if you're reading a Zionist author, even when you know that they're Zionist, or when you read from a problematic author or you promote a problematic author and you know that they're problematic. But that argument aside, like, let's just say, you know, you're just reading enjoyable books that are at a lower reading level just because you want to have fun, just because you want something easy, that's fine. But I do think that only sticking to those books or insisting that people don't need to read anything else is just a trend towards you wanting to numb your brain from the very real realities of the world around you, which then makes you more ignorant and unsympathetic to the world around you and the plight of people around you. There's a direct correlation between the people who say reading isn't political, I just read for fun, I just want to turn my brain off, and who do nothing when there are genocides happening in the world around them, who won't even share a graphic or show their solidarity, who will simply put their hands up in the privileged Western world and say, well, what can I do? And this is where I say we're like devolving as a society, we're sliding into fascism. We are all trying to numb ourselves from the awfulness happening in the world and thereby ignoring what's happening in the world and further reinforcing that people and terrible regimes can get away with genociding people and, you know, taking people's rights away and generally getting away with anything because you're too busy numbing your brain. And this is where I think we also need to talk about how reading as a hobby is, sure, it can be a hobby, it can be a fun thing, it can be a pastime, entertainment, whatever, but reading specifically is very different from other forms of entertainment, which you could argue are simply to turn off your brain. But even like other hobbies like puzzles, that still feeds a logical part of your brain. Crafty hobbies, that feeds a logical or tactile part of your brain. Reading is meant to feed an intellectual part of your brain. It is meant to feed your imagination, to grow your critical thinking, to allow you to interpret things in a new way. And I said this in a reel recently, but like, there's a reason that language education is so important in early years of education and is usually mandatory up to the end of high school in a lot of places. At least here in Ontario and Canada, it is mandatory up to grade 12, but math is actually not mandatory up to grade 12. It's like only mandatory up to grade 10 or 11, I think. And there's a reason why. Although math might not be applicable to every job that you use, although it probably in very small ways is. Language, on the other hand, is literally a part of our entire world. Reading comprehension, language, and communication skills are part of every job that you will ever do. It is part of existing in society. A lot of us who do read at a higher reading comprehension and a higher reading level are only able to do that because we have gone through some sort of language education or have done some sort of like language learning on our own. If you weren't forced to read Shakespeare or other literary fictions in high school, you probably wouldn't be at the reading level that you are at. And this is where I feel like we as a society having some expectations, pushing people, challenging people to try new things and read new things is very important, because if we hadn't been pushed by our educators, by legislation in the school boards that demands that we have to get to these reading levels, we wouldn't have the reading comprehension and critical thinking skills that we have now. So while it's great that these people who didn't like reading or who, you know, got back into reading because of book talk, because of these commercial books, well, that's great and all. If they're only using it as just like a mind-numbing entertainment activity, then like, is it really them engaging with anything significant? And I think there's this element of people like viewing reading as a hobby, but just because something's a hobby doesn't mean you can't want to get better at it. Like, just because I like to paint doesn't mean that I would want to only stay at a finger painting level. I might want to aspire to a higher level of painting, a better level of painting. And I think we need to expect more of people, of readers. And like I said, publishers are very much part to blame, and capitalism in our society and our prioritization of just making more money is also what causes this. But I think we as readers can also be cognizant of the way that late stage capitalism, the way that businesses and corporations are pushing us further into the mind numbing, into not striving for more and just letting the world pass us by. There's a reason why a lot of far future sci-fi and dystopian books like show people in the future basically numb. In WALL-E, they are all like on these like beds and not taking care of their body, and they're just like watching things on these like screens and not engaging with anything else, and not even communicating and engaging with other people. And it's because we are showing early signs of these things right now. We as a society are always consuming things, always wanting more and faster, which pushes authors and publishers to push out those things faster, with less editing, with less thought into, the impact of these works. And reading has become this mainstream, cool, fun hobby, mind-numbing hobby that you do versus an actual act of intellectualism and a way of engaging your mind on a higher level. Again, I don't mind people reading, the smutty romantasy. Like, I read the smutty romantasies, but the, claim that these books should not include anything political, or that that's all you need to read, or that it's snobby of other readers to suggest that maybe you might want to pick up a different book. That is just us playing into this same loop. Anyways, I'm in the middle of writing my first ever novel that I hope will become my debut novel, and it is a literary fiction satire of the publishing industry. And a lot of these topics have been on my mind, but another thing I've been thinking about is, what is my responsibility as a writer? And for me personally, I'm not interested in just putting out a story for the sake of, being an author or just creating entertainment. Now, this doesn't mean that I think, books that are made just for entertainment value or just for fun are bad. I think that's great. They should exist. But I do think those books can still exist in tandem with having other themes to them and having more to them than the entertainment value. One romance author that I really love is Kennedy Ryan. She has incredible books with amazing Black female leads. And one thing that she never shies away from is politics and, the heavy and hard topics within her romances, because she uses romance as, the playground for being able to tackle these hard and difficult topics. Because with romance, there is this guarantee of the happily ever after. You are playing within this parameter that, the reader is going to get that gratification, that entertainment, that nice, happy feeling at the end. But within the pages of that book, you can also engage with so many other topics because the reader has already locked in. They already feel that comfort and safety within this set structure. And I think that's just like incredibly amazing with the way that she writes her books. So that's what I mean. You can have something that is fun and light and just for the entertainment value, but it can exist within that same space. It doesn't need to exist within a void where we pretend that all the awfulness in the world isn't happening. But anyways, back to like me writing my book, like one thing I've been thinking about as I've been writing a literary fiction satire is, how much do I need to spell out to the reader? And I am of the mind that, I personally love satirical literary fictions that don't spell things out for me, that leave things ambiguous and up to interpretation. And one thing that's been really interesting about this book is that this is a character that's very much unlike myself, and a character who does some awful things, but all of that is part of a larger message. And I can imagine people misunderstanding, what this character does as my own feelings about the world or my own collapsed moral compass or something, when in fact it is a satire of someone operating this way. But yeah, I think subtlety as an art is kind of dying because we have failed to trust our readers or expect more of them. So yeah, those are my humble opinions. Let me know your thoughts on this topic, on, the different points that I brought up. Let me know if you disagree or agree. Feel free to yell at me in the comments. People do it all the time. I don't mind. And you guys have been also really great about expanding the discussion in the comments, which I totally appreciate. So yeah, leave your thoughts down below. And if you made it to the end of this video, leave a comment with a yellow heart so I know that you're a real one. Thank you all so much for watching. Again, I'm JEN-nuh-nee and this is my channel, This Story Ain't Over. You can find me on Instagram and TikTok as well, where I also do short form content and lots of book recs and more discussions and stuff that I think you'll really enjoy. I'm close to 10K on TikTok, so I'm hoping we can get get there soon, and I'm hoping we can hit 30K on Instagram sometime soon as well. So help me do that, please. And if you didn't know already, I have a publishing imprint under Bindery Books, and I also have a Patreon-esque community on Bindery, and these are people who support me and my channel and my publishing imprint, and then also get exclusive content from me on the Bindery feed. So you can go check that out at the link down below. And thank you so much to my existing Bindery members. You guys are amazing. You make my world go around, and I love you so much. I'll see you all in my next video, and please remember that the story ain't over. Bye.